The gunshot wound in his side had stopped bleeding 3 days ago, but Marcus Rawlins' new infection would likely kill him before starvation did, though both were racing toward the finish line with equal determination. He stumbled through the desert landscape outside Fort Yuma, California, in the scorching August heat of 1882. Each step sending white-hot pain through his emaciated frame as he clutched the rough adobe wall of what appeared to be a small homestead on the outskirts of town. His vision swam with dark spots, and his knees buckled just as the wooden door swung open, and a woman's startled gasp cut through the ringing in his ears. Victoria Lane had been kneading bread dough when she heard the scraping sound against her outer wall, and she grabbed the rifle her late father had left her before cautiously opening the door. What she found was not the trouble she had expected, but a man who looked more skeleton than human, his clothes hanging off sharp angles, his sun-darkened face gaunt and hollow-cheeked, his eyes glazed with fever and pain. He collapsed forward, and she dropped the rifle to catch him, surprised by how little he weighed despite his tall frame. She managed to half drag, half carry him inside, her heart pounding with alarm at the heat radiating from his body and the fresh blood seeping through his torn shirt. She laid him on the narrow bed in the corner of her single-room home, her hands already working to remove his filthy shirt. The wound in his side was inflamed and angry, the skin around it hot to the touch. She had seen enough injuries growing up on the frontier to know this man needed immediate attention, and she moved with practiced efficiency to gather clean water, her precious store of whiskey, and strips of cloth she kept for emergencies. As she cleaned the wound, he drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling words she could not make out. His ribs stood out starkly against his skin, each one visible and pronounced in a way that spoke of prolonged hunger. Victoria worked through the afternoon, cleaning and dressing his wound, forcing small sips of water between his cracked lips, and wiping his fever-hot skin with cool cloths. She studied his face as she worked, noting that beneath the ravages of starvation and illness, he was probably close to her own age of 23, maybe a year or two older. His dark hair was long and matted, his jaw covered in an uneven beard, but his features held a certain rugged strength even in their depleted state. She wondered what circumstances had brought him to such a desperate condition, what story lay behind those closed eyes. As evening approached and the desert heat finally began to ease, Marcus opened his eyes fully for the first time. The room swam into focus slowly, and he saw exposed wooden beams overhead, whitewashed walls, and the face of a woman with striking hazel eyes and auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun. She was pressing a cool cloth to his forehead, and when she noticed him watching her, she offered a gentle smile that held no fear, only concern. "You are awake," she said softly, her voice carrying a slight accent he could not quite place, something European mixed with the flat tones of the American West. "You have been unconscious for hours. I am Victoria. This is my home and you are safe here." He tried to speak, but his throat was too dry, too raw. She seemed to understand and brought a tin cup to his lips, supporting his head as he drank. The water was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted, cool and clean, and he wanted to gulp it down, but she pulled it away after a few sips. "Slowly," she cautioned. "Your stomach needs time. When did you last eat a proper meal?" He had to think about that, his fever-addled mind struggling to count the days and weeks. "March," he finally rasped. "Had some hardtack and jerky in April, but nothing since then but what I could scavenge. Cactus fruit, prairie grass once. Tried to catch a rabbit, but I was too weak." Her eyes widened with shock and compassion. It was now late August, 5 months of near starvation explained the condition of his body. "What happened to you?" she asked gently. "Posse," he managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Wrong place, wrong time. They thought I was part of a gang that robbed a stage outside Tucson. I was not. Tried to run. They shot me. Took my horse, my supplies. Left me for dead in the desert. I have been walking ever since, trying to get somewhere, anywhere. Avoiding towns because I figured they would shoot me on sight if the posse spread word." Victoria felt anger rise in her chest at the injustice of it, at the casual cruelty of men who would leave another human being to die without even verifying his guilt. She had seen too much of such things in her years on the frontier, the quick judgments and quicker violence that passed for justice in these territories. "You need food," she said firmly, "but we must be careful. Your body is not ready for much. I will make you some broth first." He watched through heavy-lidded eyes as she moved to her small stove, building up the fire that had burned low during the afternoon. She worked with quiet efficiency, pulling out a pot and filling it with water from a large ceramic jug, then adding vegetables from a basket and some dried beef from a tin. The smells that began to fill the room were almost painful in their appeal, and his stomach cramped with desperate hunger even as his mind warned him not to expect too much too soon. "Why are you helping me?" he asked after a while, genuine confusion in his voice. "You do not know me. For all you know, I could be exactly what that posse said I was." Victoria turned from the stove to look at him directly. "I know hunger when I see it," she said quietly. "I know suffering. And I know that no man deserves to starve to death, guilty or innocent. My father always said you judge a person by their actions, not by what others claim about them. Right now, you are too weak to be a threat to anyone, and even if you were not, I do not think you would hurt me. I can see it in your eyes." "You have good instincts," Marcus said, managing the ghost of a smile. "I never hurt anyone who did not deserve it, and I never stole anything in my life except maybe an extra biscuit from my mother's kitchen when I was 10 years old. I was a ranch hand in Arizona, working honest for honest pay. That's all I ever wanted." "What is your name?" she asked, stirring the pot as the broth began to bubble. "Marcus Rawlins. My friends used to call me Mark back when I had friends." "Well, Marcus Rawlins, I am Victoria Lane, though most people in Fort Yuma call me Vicky, which I tolerate but do not particularly like. I have lived here for 3 years since my father died and left me this place. I make a living doing sewing and mending for the fort and the town, and I have a small garden that gives me vegetables when the desert does not kill them. It is not much, but it is mine, and it is honest work, like you say you did." The broth took nearly an hour to cook properly, and by the time she strained it into a bowl, Marcus had drifted back into a fitful sleep. She woke him gently, and he struggled to sit up, wincing at the pain in his side. She helped him, propping him against the wall with pillows and blankets, then carefully brought a spoonful of broth to his lips. He could have fed himself, probably, but there was something profoundly moving about the care in her gesture, the gentleness of her attention. The first taste of that broth nearly brought tears to his eyes. It was simple fare, just beef and vegetables and salt, but after months of starvation and deprivation, it tasted like the finest meal in the most expensive restaurant. The warmth spread through his body, and he could almost feel his cells crying out in gratitude. She fed him slowly, watching his face for any signs of distress, and when half the bowl was gone, she set it aside despite his weak protest. "That is enough for now," she said firmly. "In a few hours, you can have more. If you eat too much too fast, you will only make yourself sick. Your body needs time to remember how to process food properly." She was right, he knew. though every fiber of his being wanted to consume everything in sight. Instead, he leaned back against the pillows and watched her as she moved about the small room, tidying up, checking his bandages, preparing her own simple dinner. The light from the oil lamps cast warm shadows across her face, and he found himself studying her more closely. She was beautiful in an understated way, with strong features and capable hands, her calico dress simple but clean, her movements economical but graceful. There was a self-sufficiency about her that spoke of resilience, of someone who had learned to survive on her own terms. "How did your father die?" he asked after a while, then immediately regretted the intrusion. "I am sorry, that is not my business." She glanced at him, and he saw old pain flicker across her face. "It is all right. He was killed 3 years ago, trying to protect a Mexican family from some drunk soldiers from the fort. They were harassing the family, and my father intervened. One of the soldiers stabbed him. The army called it an unfortunate incident and transferred the soldier to another post. No trial, no justice, just my father in the ground and me left alone." "That is terrible," Marcus said quietly, genuine sympathy in his voice. "Your father sounds like he was a good man." "He was the best man I ever knew," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "He brought me here from Austria when I was 12 years old, just the two of us after my mother died. He taught me English, taught me how to survive in this harsh land, taught me to shoot and cook and mend and keep accounts. He taught me that character matters more than anything, and that you stand up for what is right even when it costs you." She paused, blinking back tears. "I miss him every single day." They sat in companionable silence for a while, two people who had suffered losses and injustices finding an unexpected kinship in a small adobe house on the edge of Fort Yuma. Marcus felt something shift inside him, some small spark of hope that he had thought long extinguished. This woman had taken him in when she had every reason to turn him away, had fed him when he was starving, had tended his wounds when he was dying. He did not understand why, but he was profoundly grateful. True to her word, Victoria gave him more broth a few hours later, and then again in the middle of the night when his fever spiked and he cried out in delirium. She stayed by his side, changing his bandages, forcing water and broth between his lips, keeping the fever at bay with cool cloths and whispered reassurances. By the time dawn broke over the desert, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, his fever had broken and he was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. Victoria allowed herself to doze in the chair beside his bed, exhausted from the long night. She woke when the morning sun streamed through her single window, and she found Marcus watching her with clear, alert eyes that held a depth of gratitude she could feel even across the small room. "Thank you," he said simply. "You saved my life." She stretched, her back aching from the uncomfortable chair, and smiled at him. "You are not out of danger yet. That wound needs more time to heal and you need to regain your strength. But yes, I think you will live." Over the following days, Victoria established a careful routine. She fed Marcus small amounts every few hours, gradually increasing the portions as his stomach adjusted. The broth gave way to soft bread soaked in milk, then scrambled eggs, then small pieces of chicken and vegetables. She changed his bandages twice daily, relieved to see the infection gradually receding under her persistent care. She talked to him as she worked, telling him about Fort Yuma and its inhabitants, about the soldiers and the townspeople, and the Native Americans who sometimes came to trade, about the harsh beauty of the desert and the challenges of living on the frontier as a single woman. Marcus listened intently, absorbing her stories, learning about her life. He discovered that she was 23, just as he had guessed, that she spoke German and English fluently, that she had a dry sense of humor and a stubborn streak a mile wide, that she loved reading the few books she owned and missed the music she had heard as a child in Vienna. He learned that she was lonely but would never admit it, that she was strong but sometimes frightened, that she was kind but nobody's fool. In turn, he told her about his own life, speaking more freely than he had with anyone in years. He had been born in Texas, the youngest of 4 boys, and had lost his entire family to cholera when he was 17. He had drifted west, working cattle ranches and horse farms, never staying in one place too long, never forming deep attachments because the pain of loss was still too raw. He had been 25 years old when the posse mistook him for an outlaw, and those 5 months of running and starving and suffering had aged him beyond his years. "I thought I was going to die," he admitted one evening as she fed him a bowl of stew, the first truly solid meal he had managed. "I had accepted it, actually. And then I saw your house and some instinct made me stumble toward it, made me try one more time. I am glad I did." Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, and something passed between them, some recognition of shared pain and unexpected connection. "I am glad you did too," she said softly. "It has been a long time since I had someone to talk to, really talk to. The women in town are friendly enough, but they keep their distance because I am different, because I live alone. The soldiers think a woman on her own is fair game for their advances. I have learned to keep to myself mostly, but it gets lonely." "You should not have to live like that," Marcus said, a flash of anger in his voice. "You should be able to live your life without harassment or isolation." "That is the way of things here," she said with a slight shrug, though he could see the words bothered her. "Women alone are not trusted, not quite respected. They think there is something wrong with me for not remarrying after my father died, for not attaching myself to some man for protection. But I saw how my father was killed for doing the right thing, and I saw how the army protected its own instead of seeking justice. I learned that I could only truly rely on myself." Marcus understood that philosophy more than she knew. He had learned similar lessons through his own losses and betrayals. But as he looked at this strong, capable woman who had saved his life, he found himself wanting to offer her something more than just understanding. He wanted to offer her partnership, protection not because she needed it, but because she deserved someone in her corner. These thoughts surprised him with their intensity, and he pushed them aside for the moment, focusing instead on regaining his strength. By the end of the first week, Marcus was able to sit up on his own and feed himself, though he tired easily. By the end of the second week, he could stand and take a few steps around the room, leaning on Victoria for support. The wound in his side was healing cleanly now, the flesh knitting back together under her careful ministrations. His body was beginning to fill out slightly as regular meals worked their magic, though he remained painfully thin. The light that had been extinguished in his eyes during those months of suffering was starting to return, kindled by good food, rest, and the unexpected warmth of human connection. Victoria found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the sound of his voice, and the way his rare smiles transformed his gaunt face. She caught herself sometimes, watching him sleep or studying the way his hands moved as he talked, and she would feel a flutter in her chest that both frightened and thrilled her. She had sworn off romantic entanglements after watching several women in Fort Yuma trapped in unhappy marriages with brutal or indifferent men, but Marcus was different. There was a gentleness to him, despite his obvious strength, a fundamental decency that showed in every interaction. One afternoon during the third week, as Marcus sat at her small table eating a plate of beans and cornbread, he brought up the subject that had been weighing on both their minds. I need to start thinking about what comes next, he said carefully. I cannot impose on your hospitality forever, and I need to find work, rebuild my life somehow. Victoria felt her heart clench at the thought of him leaving, but she kept her voice steady. You are still healing. Your wound is not fully closed, and you have not regained enough strength to do hard labor. If you push yourself too soon, you will only set back your recovery. I know, he said, frustration evident in his voice, but I feel like I am taking advantage of you. You have already given me so much, asked for nothing in return. I have no money to pay you, nothing to offer except my gratitude, which seems woefully inadequate. She set down the shirt she had been mending and looked at him directly. I did not help you expecting payment, Marcus. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, because I could not watch another human being suffer when I had the means to ease that suffering. You do not owe me anything. But I want to give you something, he insisted. I want to contribute to be useful. Let me help you around the house. I can chop wood once my strength returns, fix things that need fixing. I notice your door does not hang quite right, and there are gaps in the wall that let in drafts. I am good with my hands, good at building and repairing things. Let me earn my keep. Victoria considered this, warring with herself. Part of her wanted to send him on his way before her growing feelings became any stronger, before she risked the pain of another loss. But a larger part of her wanted him to stay, wanted to keep hearing his voice and seeing his face across the table, wanted to continue this unexpected companionship that had brightened her solitary existence. All right, she finally agreed. But you take it slow, and if I say you are overdoing it, you stop. Your health comes first. Relief and gratitude washed over his features. Deal, he said, extending his hand across the table. She took it, and the warmth of his palm against hers sent a jolt through her entire body. From the way his eyes widened slightly, she thought he might have felt it too. True to his word, Marcus began helping around the house as his strength allowed. At first it was simple things like folding laundry or peeling vegetables while Victoria cooked. But as the days passed and his body continued to heal, he took on more substantial tasks. He fixed her door so it closed smoothly, repaired the broken leg on her table, patched the gaps in the walls with fresh adobe mud. He chopped wood in short sessions, resting frequently, building his endurance slowly. He tended her struggling garden, coaxing her vegetables back to health with techniques he had learned working various ranches. Victoria continued her sewing and mending work, but she found herself hurrying through her tasks so she could spend more time talking with Marcus. They discussed everything and nothing, sharing stories and dreams and fears with an openness that surprised them both. She told him about her childhood in Vienna, the poverty that had driven her family to immigrate, the dreams her mother had held of a better life in America before dying on the ship crossing the Atlantic. He told her about growing up in Texas, the closeness of his family, the devastation of losing them all within a single terrible week, the years of drifting that had followed. One evening as they sat outside watching the sun set over the desert, painting the landscape in impossible shades of orange and purple, Marcus turned to her with an expression of wonder. "I had forgotten," he said quietly. "Forgotten what?" Victoria asked, though something in her already knew the answer. "What it feels like to have something worth living for. These past months, I was just surviving, just putting one foot in front of the other because stopping meant dying. But now, being here with you, I remember what it feels like to actually want to live, to look forward to tomorrow. You gave me that, Victoria. You gave me back my life, and not just in the physical sense." She felt tears prick her eyes, her throat tight with emotion. "You have given me something too," she admitted. I did not realize how much I had closed myself off until you arrived. I told myself I was fine alone, that I did not need anyone, but that was only half true. I can survive alone, yes, but I am better with you here. I am happier." He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. They sat like that as darkness fell, neither speaking, both acutely aware of the shift happening between them, the transformation from grateful patient and compassionate caretaker to something deeper and more profound. The fourth week brought new challenges and new revelations. Marcus was growing stronger each day, and with his increased strength came increased restlessness. He needed to find work, needed to start building a future, but the question of what that future looked like remained unresolved. He could not keep living off Victoria's generosity indefinitely, no matter how much both of them seemed to want him to stay. He needed to establish himself, to prove he was more than just a starving vagrant she had taken pity on. He began making careful trips into Fort Yuma proper, keeping his hat pulled low and avoiding the military post itself. Victoria had warned him that the soldiers might remember tales of the wanted man from the spring, and while 5 months might have dulled their memories, it was better not to take chances. Instead, he sought work with the civilian population, offering his skills as a handyman and laborer. The response was initially cautious. Strangers were always viewed with suspicion in frontier towns, and Marcus's gaunt appearance and reluctance to talk about his past made some people nervous. But Victoria's reputation as a decent, hard-working woman opened some doors, and when people learned he was staying with her, helping her out, they were more willing to give him a chance. He fixed a broken wagon wheel for the general store owner, repaired a collapsed chicken coop for a widow on the edge of town, built new shelves for the saloon keeper, who was impressed enough with his craftsmanship to recommend him to others. Word spread slowly but steadily that Marcus Rawlins was a skilled worker and a fair man, and jobs began to trickle in more regularly. He was careful with the money he earned, using most of it to buy supplies for Victoria's household and save the rest toward an uncertain future. She protested when he brought home bags of flour and sugar, tins of coffee and peaches, but he was adamant. "You fed me when I had nothing," he said firmly. "Let me provide now that I can. It is important to me." She understood the pride behind his words, the need to contribute and be useful, so she accepted his gifts with grace. The truth was, having the extra supplies made her life significantly easier, and the money she saved on food could go toward fabric and thread for her sewing business or other necessities. They were building something together, though neither had yet put words to exactly what that something was. The fifth week brought clarity in an unexpected form. Marcus had been repairing a fence for a rancher a few miles outside Fort Yuma when he overheard 2 men talking about the stage robbery from the previous spring. They were discussing how the real gang had been caught down in Sonora, Mexico, tried and hanged for multiple robberies and murders. The news hit Marcus like a physical blow. He was cleared, vindicated, no longer a wanted man. But the relief was mixed with bitter anger at the months of suffering he had endured, at the hasty judgment that had nearly killed him. He rode back to Victoria's house in a daze, processing the information and what it meant for his future. When he told her the news, she reacted with the same mixture of relief and anger, her eyes flashing with fury at the injustice of it all. 5 months, she said, her voice shaking. You nearly died because men could not be bothered to verify facts before shooting you and leaving you in the desert. The law that is supposed to protect us is sometimes the most lawless force of all. Marcus pulled her into his arms, needing her warmth and solidity to anchor him. She pressed her face against his chest, and he could feel her trembling with emotion. I survived, he said quietly. I survived because I found you, because you saved me. Maybe all of that had to happen exactly the way it did to bring me here to this moment. She pulled back to look up at him, her hazel eyes searching his face. You really believe that? She asked. That all that suffering had a purpose? I do not know, he admitted. But I know that I would go through it all again if it meant ending up here with you. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life, Victoria. Not despite everything that happened, but somehow because of it. I was drifting before, just existing. Now I feel like I have found where I belong. Her breath caught at his words, at the intensity in his dark eyes. Marcus, she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, tentative at first, then deeper as she responded with equal fervor. The kiss was everything she had imagined and more, full of longing and promise and the sweet recognition of two souls finding their match. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard, faces flushed. I love you, Marcus said, the words coming easily now that the dam had broken. I think I have been falling in love with you since that first bowl of broth, since you looked at me with kindness instead of fear or judgment. I love your strength and your compassion, your intelligence and your stubbornness. I love the way you laugh and the way you concentrate when you are sewing. I love everything about you, Victoria Lane, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling, radiant with joy. I love you too, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I have tried to protect my heart, but it was useless. You worked your way in without even trying, just by being yourself, by being kind and decent and real. Yes, Marcus Rawlins, I will build a life with you. I want nothing more. They kissed again, longer this time, savoring the moment and the promise it held. When they finally pulled apart, Marcus was grinning, the expression transforming his face in a way that made Victoria's heart skip. We should do this properly, he said. I have no ring, no fancy words, but Victoria, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life showing you how grateful I am that you saved me, how much I cherish you? Yes, she said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. They married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fort Yuma, with the widow whose chicken coop Marcus had repaired, and the general store owner serving as witnesses. Victoria wore a new dress she had sewn herself from pale blue fabric Marcus had bought with his earnings, and she carried wildflowers he had picked that morning from the desert. Marcus wore his only decent clothes, cleaned and mended by Victoria's skilled hands, and he could not stop smiling as the circuit preacher pronounced them husband and wife. The kiss they shared at the altar was chaste compared to the ones they had exchanged in private, but it still drew warm applause from the small gathering. They walked back to their home, hand in hand, husband and wife, two people who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build a future together. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a culmination of weeks of growing desire and emotional intimacy. Marcus was gentle, mindful of Victoria's inexperience, taking his time to learn her body and show her the depth of his love. Victoria responded with equal tenderness and surprising boldness, shedding her inhibitions along with her clothes, trusting him completely. They made love slowly, savoring every touch and kiss, every whispered endearment, cementing their bond in the most fundamental way. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed that would soon need to be replaced with something larger, Marcus held Victoria close and marveled at the turn his life had taken. 6 weeks earlier, he had been a dying man, starving and wounded and utterly alone. Now he was married to a woman he loved beyond measure, starting a new life in a place that was beginning to feel like home. The transformation was almost miraculous, and he sent up a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had guided his failing steps to Victoria's door. Victoria traced patterns on Marcus's chest, her mind equally full of wonder and gratitude. She had spent 3 years alone, building walls around her heart to protect herself from further pain, and this man had dismantled those walls with nothing but kindness and honesty and love. She thought about her father and hoped he would approve of her choice, hoped he was somewhere watching and smiling at her happiness. She thought he would have liked Marcus, would have recognized in him the same qualities of decency and integrity that her father had valued above all else. The weeks following their marriage fell into a comfortable rhythm. Marcus continued taking odd jobs around Fort Yuma and the surrounding ranches, building a reputation as a reliable and skilled worker. His body continued to fill out, the sharp angles softening as regular meals and Victoria's excellent cooking worked their magic. He would never be a large man, his frame too naturally lean for bulk, but he regained a healthy weight and his strength returned fully. The wound in his side healed to a puckered scar that would always remind him of how close he had come to death. Victoria continued her sewing work, but with Marcus's income supplementing her own, the financial pressure eased considerably. They were not wealthy by any means, but they had enough to live comfortably, to save a little for the future, to occasionally splurge on small luxuries like real coffee or a book Marcus could read aloud to her in the evenings. They talked about expanding the house, maybe adding another room, planning for a future that might include children. The people of Fort Yuma gradually accepted Marcus as one of their own, the stranger becoming familiar, the outsider becoming community. There were still those who viewed him with suspicion, who wondered about his past and whispered about the propriety of Victoria taking in a strange man before marrying him so quickly. But most people saw the genuine affection between the newlyweds and were happy for them. The widow whose chicken coop Marcus had repaired became a good friend to Victoria, and the general store owner gave Marcus steady work doing repairs and maintenance around his property. 3 months into their marriage, on a cool November evening, Victoria told Marcus she was pregnant. He reacted with pure joy, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. They spent the evening making plans and dreaming about their child, about what kind of parents they would be, about the future they were building together. Marcus placed his hand on her still flat belly and made a solemn vow to be the best father he could be, to give their child the love and security he had lost too young. "Our baby will know what it means to be cherished," he said fiercely, "to be protected and loved and valued. I will work my hands to the bone to provide for you both, and I will thank God every single day for bringing me to your door." Victoria cradled his face in her hands, her eyes shining with love and tears. "Our baby already knows love," she said softly, "because he or she is growing inside a body filled with love for you. This child is a gift, Marcus, a symbol of everything we have survived and everything we have built together." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the winter months. Victoria bloomed with it, her skin glowing and her eyes bright with happiness, despite the occasional discomfort. Marcus fussed over her constantly, taking on more of the household chores and insisting she rest whenever possible. He read to her from her precious books, rubbed her feet when they swelled, held her hair when morning sickness struck. He was attentive and devoted, sometimes to the point of being overbearing, but Victoria found his concern touching rather than annoying. As her belly grew round and pronounced, they worked together to prepare for the baby's arrival. Marcus built a beautiful cradle from wood he bought with money saved carefully over months, carving simple designs into the headboard and sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Victoria sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her skilled fingers creating soft, practical garments for their child. They cleaned and reorganized their small home, making space for this new life that would soon join them. Spring came to the desert with its brief explosion of wildflowers and moderate temperatures, and Victoria's time drew near. The widow, whose name was Martha Grayson, had agreed to help with the birth, having delivered many babies in her 60-some years. Marcus was a nervous wreck as the day approached, hovering over Victoria and jumping at every wince or sigh. She found his anxiety endearing and exhausting in equal measure, reassuring him constantly that women had been having babies since the beginning of time and she would be fine. On a warm afternoon in late April of 1883, Victoria went into labor. Marcus fetched Martha immediately, then spent the next several hours pacing outside the house because the women had banished him from the birthing room. He could hear Victoria's cries of pain through the adobe walls, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. He wanted to be with her, to help somehow, but Martha had been firm that he would only be in the way. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was actually only about 6 hours, he heard a different cry, the strong, indignant wail of a newborn baby. He was through the door before Martha could call him, his eyes seeking Victoria immediately. She was propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but smiling, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. Martha stood nearby, grinning with satisfaction. "You have a son," Victoria said, her voice tired but full of joy. "A healthy, strong son with a good set of lungs." Marcus approached slowly, almost reverently, unable to tear his eyes away from the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, making small, snuffling noises. Marcus sat carefully on the edge of the bed and reached out a tentative finger, which his son immediately grasped with surprising strength. The touch went straight to his heart, and tears began streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Marcus whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "You did such an amazing job, Victoria. He is absolutely perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" Victoria asked, and Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. She carefully transferred the baby to his arms, and Marcus cradled his son against his chest, overwhelmed by the rush of love and protectiveness that flooded through him. This tiny person was half him and half Victoria, a physical manifestation of their love, and he had never felt anything as powerful as the emotions coursing through him in that moment. "What should we name him?" Victoria asked, watching her husband fall in love with their son. They had discussed names over the past months, but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son's face, Marcus knew with sudden certainty what the name should be. "Thomas," he said firmly. "Thomas Joseph Rawlins, after my father and your father." So he carries both their names, both their legacies of strength and decency. Victoria's eyes filled with fresh tears, touched by the tribute to their fathers. "Thomas Joseph Rawlins," she repeated. "It is perfect, Tommy for short when he is little." Martha cleaned up and gave them instructions for caring for the newborn before leaving them alone as a new family. Marcus could not bring himself to put Tommy down, holding him for hours as the baby slept, studying every tiny feature, counting fingers and toes, marveling at the miracle of new life. Victoria watched them both with contentment, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. That night, with Tommy finally sleeping in his beautiful cradle and Victoria resting comfortably, Marcus stepped outside to look at the stars. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the suffering and starvation, the gunshot wound and the desperate stumble to this house, the woman who had saved him in every possible way. He thought about how close he had come to death, how easily he might never have known this incredible joy. "Thank you," he whispered to the desert night, "to God or fate or whatever force governed the universe. Thank you for bringing me here, for giving me a second chance, for blessing me with a family beyond my wildest dreams. I will spend every day of the rest of my life being worthy of these gifts." The months following Tommy's birth were challenging in the way all new parenthood is challenging, filled with sleepless nights and constant worry, but also suffused with joy and wonder. Marcus and Victoria navigated the learning curve together, supporting each other through the difficult moments and celebrating every milestone. Tommy's first smile, his first time sleeping through the night, the way he would track movement with his eyes and grasp at anything within reach, all of these moments were precious beyond measure. Marcus continued working, but he arranged his jobs to allow him to spend as much time as possible with his family. He turned down opportunities that would take him away overnight, prioritizing presence over profit. The people who hired him appreciated his work ethic and integrity, and word spread that Marcus Rawlins was not just a skilled laborer but a good man, the kind of person you could trust with your most important projects. Victoria balanced motherhood with her sewing work, often doing mending with Tommy sleeping in a sling against her chest. She was a natural mother, patient and nurturing but also practical, not letting worry consume her the way it did some new parents. She had survived too much to be overly precious, understanding that children were resilient and needed room to grow and explore within reason. As Tommy grew from infant to baby to toddler, the small house became increasingly cramped. When Tommy was about 18 months old, Marcus made the decision they had been discussing for months. Using money they had saved carefully, combined with a small loan from the general store owner who had become a good friend, they purchased a larger piece of land about a mile from Victoria's original homestead. The land included a small but sturdy house with 2 proper bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and even a separate workshop where Marcus could do carpentry projects. The move was bittersweet for Victoria, leaving the house where her father had lived and died, where she had taken in a dying stranger and fallen in love, where her son had been born. But Marcus understood her complicated feelings and made sure to honor the significance of that place. They kept the original homestead, using it for storage and as a potential future rental property, so it remained in the family rather than being sold to strangers. The new house felt like a fresh start, a symbol of how far they had come from those desperate early days. They painted the walls, replaced worn floorboards, and made it truly theirs. Marcus built new furniture to fill the larger space, including a proper dining table that could seat 6 people comfortably and a rocking chair for Victoria to use when nursing or soothing Tommy. Victoria sewed curtains and cushions, adding softness and color to the utilitarian structure. Tommy thrived in the new house with more room to play and explore. He was a curious, energetic child with Marcus's dark hair and Victoria's hazel eyes, and he brought constant joy and occasional chaos to his parents' lives. Marcus was a devoted father, spending hours playing with his son, teaching him about tools and animals and the desert landscape, instilling in him the values of kindness and integrity that both parents held dear. When Tommy was 2 years old, Victoria became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first, with more intense morning sickness and fatigue, but she navigated it with her characteristic strength and practicality. Marcus was even more attentive this time, having learned from experience what helped and what did not. He took over most of the household chores and corralled Tommy when Victoria needed rest, becoming adept at managing a busy toddler while keeping the household running smoothly. Their daughter was born on a cold January morning in 1886. Another relatively smooth delivery, with Martha once again serving as midwife. They named her Julia Ann Rawlins, Julia after Victoria's mother and Anne after Marcus's mother, continuing the tradition of honoring their lost parents. Julia was a calmer baby than Tommy had been, more content to observe and less frantically active. And Victoria joked that God knew to give them an easier second child because they already had their hands full with Tommy. With 2 children, life became even busier but no less joyful. The house filled with laughter and the sounds of childhood, with Tommy's endless questions and Julia's babbling, with the clatter of toys and the patter of small feet. Marcus expanded his carpentry business, taking on apprentices and building a solid reputation throughout the Fort Yuma region. Victoria focused more on motherhood and less on sewing, though she still took on occasional special projects when time allowed. The years passed in a blur of activity and growth. Tommy started attending the small school in Fort Yuma, learning to read and write and figure numbers, coming home each day bursting with information and stories. Julia grew from baby to toddler to little girl, quieter than her brother but equally bright, with a particular talent for drawing that Victoria encouraged by keeping her supplied with paper and pencils whenever possible. The family attended church regularly, became deeply embedded in the community, hosted dinners for friends and neighbors, celebrated holidays with joy and gratitude. When Tommy was 7 and Julia was 5, Victoria found herself pregnant a 3rd time, a surprise but a welcome one. Marcus joked that they might end up with a whole brood, and Victoria laughed, saying 3 was probably enough unless God had other plans. This pregnancy was easier than the second, and their second daughter was born in the summer of 1888, a healthy baby girl they named Catherine Marie Rawlins. Catherine after the widow Martha's daughter who had died young, and Marie simply because they both liked the sound of it. 3 children meant the house was bursting at the seams, but they made it work. Marcus built bunk beds for the girls to share a room when Catherine grew out of infancy, and Tommy got his own small room that he declared was the best thing ever. The workshop behind the house became Marcus's refuge when he needed quiet to think or work on particularly intricate projects, and the kitchen became Victoria's domain, where she ruled with good humor and efficiency, somehow managing to feed 5 people 3 meals a day while keeping the children mostly civilized and the house mostly clean. As the children grew, Marcus and Victoria made sure to teach them about their family history, about the grandparents they had never met but whose names they carried, about the journey that had brought their parents together. They told the story carefully, editing the worst details for young ears, but making sure the children understood the importance of compassion, of helping others in need, of not judging people based on appearances or rumors. "Your father came to our door when he was at his lowest point," Victoria told them one evening. All 3 children gathered around as their parents shared the story yet again. He had been hurt by people who did not care about truth or justice, and he was starving and sick. I could have turned him away. Many people would have. But I chose to help him, and that choice changed both our lives forever. It brought us together, brought all of you into existence. Remember that when you see someone in need, you never know how one act of kindness might change everything. Tommy, at age 11, asked the question he had asked before but was now old enough to understand more fully. "Were you scared, Mama, when Papa showed up looking so bad?" Victoria considered the question seriously. "A little," she admitted. "But more than scared, I felt compelled to help. Sometimes you just know what the right thing to do is, even if it is frightening or difficult. And I saw something in your father's eyes, even when he was so sick and weak. I saw goodness, saw pain, saw a person who deserved compassion. I have never regretted that decision for even a moment." Marcus pulled Victoria close, kissing the top of her head. "And I have never stopped being grateful," he said quietly. "Your mother saved my life in every way a person can be saved. She fed me when I was starving, healed me when I was dying, loved me when I thought I would never feel connection again. Everything good in my life stems from the moment I stumbled to her door." Julia, age 9 and always the most sensitive of the children, had tears in her eyes. "That is the most romantic story ever," she declared. "You are like a fairy tale." Catherine, at age 6, was more practical. "I am glad you did not die, Papa," she said seriously, "because then we would not exist, and I like existing." The whole family laughed at that, the sound filling the house with warmth and joy. These were the moments Marcus treasured most, the ordinary evenings with his family gathered around, everyone healthy and happy and together. He thought sometimes about the man he had been before that gunshot wound and those months of starvation, before stumbling to Victoria's door. That Marcus had been closed off, drifting, afraid to form attachments because of the pain of his losses. This Marcus was open and connected, rooted in place and purpose, grateful every single day for the second chance he had been given. The children grew and changed, developing distinct personalities and dreams. Tommy showed an aptitude for working with his hands like his father, spending hours in the workshop learning carpentry and dreaming of one day building houses. Julia discovered a love of reading and words, devouring every book she could get her hands on and writing stories in journals Victoria bought for her. Catherine was the adventurer, always exploring, always asking questions, always pushing boundaries in ways that simultaneously thrilled and terrified her parents. Marcus's carpentry business continued to thrive, expanding beyond simple repairs to custom furniture and even home construction. He hired several workers and became known throughout the region for quality craftsmanship and fair dealing. The money was good, better than he had ever imagined during those lean years of drifting, and he was able to provide his family with a comfortable life. Not luxurious, but secure, with enough for necessities and some left over for the occasional treat or to save for the children's futures. Victoria became known in Fort Yuma not just as a seamstress, but as a woman of wisdom and compassion. Other women sought her advice on everything from recipes to child-rearing to navigating difficult marriages. She had a gift for listening without judgment and offering practical suggestions without being preachy. She also became involved in efforts to help the most vulnerable members of the community, particularly widows and orphan children, remembering her own time alone and wanting to ease that burden for others. The years continued their steady march. The children entered adolescence, bringing new challenges and new joys. Tommy at 15 was nearly as tall as Marcus and showed every sign of being a good, decent man. Julia at 13 was bookish and romantic, already catching the eyes of boys in town, though she seemed more interested in stories than reality. Catherine at 11 was still fearless, with a particular fondness for horses and the open desert. Marcus was approaching 40 years old now, his dark hair showing threads of silver, his face lined from years of sun and wind but still handsome, still capable of making Victoria's heart skip when he smiled at her a certain way. Victoria was 38, her auburn hair also showing some gray, her figure softened by 3 pregnancies but still strong, still beautiful in Marcus's eyes. They had been married nearly 14 years, together through challenges and triumphs, their love deepening with each passing year. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, They sat together on the porch they had added to the house a few years earlier, watching the stars emerge in the vast desert sky. Marcus held Victoria's hand, his thumb tracing idle patterns on her palm, both of them comfortable in the silence of long familiarity. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" Victoria asked quietly. "If you had not come to my door that day, if I had turned you away, if any number of small things had changed." "All the time," Marcus admitted. "I think about how close I came to dying out there in the desert, how easily I might have stumbled in a different direction, or not had the strength to make it to your house. I think about how you could have been afraid, could have shut the door in my face, could have called for the soldiers. Every choice you made, every moment of compassion, led to this life we have built. How could I not think about that?" "I think about it too," Victoria said. "I had convinced myself I was content alone, that I did not need anyone. I had built this whole life around independence and self-sufficiency. And then you appeared, forcing me to open my heart again, reminding me that connection is what makes life worth living. You gave me as much as I gave you, Marcus, maybe more." He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "We saved each other," he said. "That is the truth of it. I was dying physically, you were dying emotionally, and we both found life again through each other. I love you more now than I did on our wedding day, and I thought that was impossible. But love grows if you tend it properly, if you choose each other every day." "I will always choose you," Victoria whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Every single day for the rest of my life." They sat like that until the night grew cold, wrapped in each other and the comfortable weight of shared history. Then went inside to their bed where they had shared countless nights of passion and comfort, where they had whispered dreams and fears, where they had held each other through illnesses and sorrows and everyday troubles. Their physical relationship remained strong, desire tempered by deep affection, intimate knowledge allowing them to please each other in ways that went beyond mere physical release. As their children grew toward adulthood, Marcus and Victoria began discussing what their own next chapter might look like. Tommy was expressing interest in starting his own carpentry business, possibly in a larger town with more opportunities. Julia was dreaming of becoming a teacher, maybe even attending the new normal school in California if they could afford it. Catherine was still young enough that her dreams changed weekly, but her current fixation was becoming a rancher, raising horses and cattle in the wide open spaces. "They are all going to leave eventually," Victoria said one day, the realization hitting her with bittersweet force. "We will be alone again, just the two of us." Marcus pulled her close, understanding her complicated feelings. "And we will build a new life then, just like we built this one. It will be different, yes, but it will still be good. We will still have each other, and that has always been enough." She nodded against his chest, reassured by his steadiness. "You are right. I just never imagined this phase would go so quickly. It feels like yesterday that Tommy was born, and now he is almost a man." "Time moves faster when you are happy," Marcus said. "That is what my father used to say. The hard times drag on forever, but the good times fly by. We have been blessed with mostly good times, Victoria. We have been blessed beyond measure. The family faced challenges, of course. No life is without difficulty. There was the year when drought threatened their water supply and Marcus had to dig a deeper well. There was the winter when Julia fell seriously ill with pneumonia, and they spent terrifying weeks nursing her back to health. There was the time when Tommy got into a fight defending a younger child from bullies and came home with a black eye and split lip, but also his parents' fierce pride. There were financial worries and social tensions and the everyday friction of different personalities living in close quarters. But through all of it, Marcus and Victoria provided a foundation of love and stability that allowed their children to thrive. They disciplined when necessary, but always with explanation and fairness. They encouraged dreams but also taught responsibility and hard work. They modeled what a loving partnership looked like, showing their children that marriage could be a source of joy and strength rather than just an economic necessity or social obligation. When Tommy was 18, he announced his intention to marry his sweetheart, a nice girl named Sarah who worked at her family's bakery in town. Marcus and Victoria gave their blessing, remembering their own young love, and hosted a beautiful wedding on their property with half the town in attendance. Watching their son exchange vows, seeing the love and hope on his face, Marcus felt the weight of time and continuity, the sense of life moving forward in endless cycles. Julia, at 16, was still pursuing her education with fierce determination, already corresponding with the normal school about enrollment. She had won a partial scholarship based on her excellent grades and writing samples, and Marcus and Victoria were scraping together funds to cover the rest. It would be a sacrifice, but both agreed it was worth it to see their daughter achieve her dreams. Catherine, at 14, was in the full bloom of adolescence, passionate and impulsive and absolutely certain about everything despite her parents' gentle reminders that she might change her mind a dozen more times before settling on a path. She spent every free moment at a nearby ranch, working with horses in exchange for riding lessons, coming home exhausted and glowing with happiness. Marcus was proud of all his children, proud of the people they were becoming, proud that he and Victoria had managed to raise them with love and values intact despite the many challenges of frontier life. He thought sometimes about the man he might have become if that posse had not shot him, if he had not stumbled to Victoria's door. He probably would have kept drifting, kept avoiding connections, kept wasting his potential on temporary jobs and temporary locations. Instead, he had built something permanent and precious, something worth more than all the gold in California. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Marcus surprised Victoria with a piece of jewelry he had saved for months to buy, a delicate gold locket containing tiny photographs of their 3 children. She cried when she opened it, overcome by the thoughtfulness of the gift and the reminder of everything they had built together. 15 years, she said, shaking her head in wonder. It has gone so fast, Marcus. I remember that day you arrived like it was yesterday, but it was over 16 years ago now. We have lived a whole lifetime together. Many more lifetimes to come, he promised, fastening the locket around her neck. We are not old yet, Victoria. We have decades ahead of us, decades to watch our children build their own lives, to meet grandchildren, to grow old together. I plan to be by your side until we are both ancient and gray. She laughed through her tears, touching the locket at her throat. I will hold you to that promise. You are stuck with me, Marcus Rawlins, for better or worse. All better, he said firmly. Even the worst days with you are better than the best days were before I found you. They celebrated their anniversary quietly, just the 2 of them enjoying a nice dinner and evening alone while the children stayed with friends. It was rare to have the house to themselves, and they savored the privacy, talking late into the night about their past, present, and future, making love with the unhurried passion of long familiarity, falling asleep wrapped in each other's arms as they had done thousands of times before. The next few years brought continued change and growth. Tommy and Sarah had their first child, making Marcus and Victoria grandparents and bringing a new kind of joy into their lives. Julia left for normal school, writing long letters home about her studies and the wider world she was discovering. Catherine turned 16 and began seriously courting a young rancher's son, much to her parents' mixed feelings of approval and anxiety. Marcus's business continued to prosper, and he began thinking about semi-retirement, possibly turning over the daily operations to Tommy and his other trained workers while he focused on special custom projects. Victoria had more time now with the children grown, and she threw herself into her community work, helping to establish a small lending library and organizing charitable efforts for families facing hardship. They had become pillars of the Fort Yuma community, respected and admired, their story of how they met transformed over time into local legend. People told it various ways, embellishing some details, softening others, but the core remained true. A dying man and a compassionate woman whose chance encounter had blossomed into enduring love. As Marcus approached 45 and Victoria 43, they were solid and settled in ways their younger selves could never have imagined. The desperation and uncertainty of their early days had given way to stability and confidence. They owned their home outright, had money saved, had raised 3 good children, had built a life of purpose and meaning. They had been tested by time and circumstance and had emerged stronger, their bond unbreakable. One evening, sitting on their porch watching the sunset as they had done countless times over the years, Marcus turned to Victoria with an expression of profound contentment. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. She looked at him with mild alarm, worried by his serious tone. "What is it?" "I just want to make sure you know, really know, what you mean to me," he said, taking both her hands in his. "I was dead in every way that mattered when I came to your door. My body was failing, yes, but my spirit had already given up. I had nothing left, no hope, no dreams, no reason to keep fighting. And then you opened that door, and you looked at me with kindness instead of fear, and you gave me food and water and care, and you quite literally saved my life." "Marcus, we have talked about this," Victoria started, but he shook his head. "Please let me finish. You saved my life, yes, but more than that, you gave me a reason to have a life. You showed me that love was still possible, that connection was still possible, that I could trust again and open my heart again. You gave me a family, children, a home, a purpose. You gave me everything that makes life worth living. And I want you to know that not a single day has passed in the last 16 years that I have not been grateful for you. Not one single day." Tears streamed down Victoria's face, and she reached up to cup his beloved face in her hands. "You saved me too," she said fiercely. "I was so lonely, Marcus, so isolated and sad, even though I would never admit it. I had convinced myself that being alone was strength, that not needing anyone was admirable. And then you needed me, and I needed to be needed, and in helping you, I helped myself. You brought joy back into my life. You brought love and laughter and purpose. We saved each other, my darling. We have always saved each other." They kissed as the sun painted the desert in shades of fire, 2 people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful and lasting. Their love story was not one of easy romance and smooth sailing. It was a story of survival and resilience, of compassion and second chances, of 2 wounded souls finding healing in each other. It was messy and complicated and absolutely real, forged in the harsh crucible of the wild West frontier, tested by hardship and strengthened by commitment. As darkness fell and they went inside to their warm, lamp-lit home filled with memories and love, Marcus and Victoria Rawlins knew with absolute certainty that they had found what so many people searched for their entire lives and never found. A true partner, a soul-deep connection, a love that transcended circumstance and endured through time. They had faced down death and despair and emerged victorious, not because they were particularly special or blessed, but because they had chosen each other, had chosen love, had chosen to build rather than withdraw. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and sorrows as all years do. They celebrated grandchildren's births and mourned friends' deaths. They watched their children build their own lives and families. They grew older together, their bodies showing the inevitable signs of age but their love remaining as strong as ever. Tommy took over the carpentry business completely and made a great success of it. Julia became a beloved teacher in a school in San Diego, eventually marrying a fellow teacher and starting her own family. Catherine did indeed become a rancher, partnering with her husband to build a thriving operation raising horses. Marcus and Victoria became great-grandparents, surrounded by family during holidays and celebrations. The house they had shared for so many years filled with multiple generations. They told their story to grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the tale growing richer with each retelling, a family legend that carried important lessons about compassion, resilience, and the transformative power of love. When Marcus was in his early 60s, his health began to fail, not dramatically but noticeably. His joints ached from years of hard labor, his breathing sometimes came hard, his energy was not what it once was. Victoria tended him with the same fierce devotion she had shown that first day when he had collapsed at her door, and he joked that he had married his own personal physician. The children visited frequently, worried about their aging parents but reassured by the obvious deep bond that sustained them both. On a warm spring evening, nearly 40 years after that fateful day in August 1882, Marcus and Victoria sat on their porch one last time. He was weak now, both of them knowing the end was approaching, but he was at peace. He had lived a full, rich life beyond anything he could have imagined during those desperate months of starvation and suffering. He had loved deeply and been loved in return. He had raised children and seen grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He had built things of beauty and usefulness with his hands. He had made a difference in his community and his family. He had lived. No regrets. Victoria asked softly, holding his hand as the sun set in glorious color across the desert they had called home for so long. "Not a single one," Marcus replied, his voice weak but certain. "Except maybe that I could not have more time with you. 1,000 years would not be enough, Victoria. But I am grateful for the years we had, so grateful." "I am grateful too," she whispered, tears streaming down her weathered face. "For every day, every moment. You have been the great love of my life, Marcus Rawlins, the great adventure. Thank you for stumbling to my door all those years ago. Thank you for letting me save you. Thank you for saving me," he echoed, "in every possible way." He passed peacefully in his sleep that night, Victoria holding him close, and while her grief was profound, it was tempered by gratitude for the incredible life they had shared. She lived several more years herself, surrounded by family who loved her, telling stories about Marcus and their life together, keeping his memory alive and bright. When Victoria finally passed, in her sleep at age 75, she was buried next to Marcus in the Fort Yuma Cemetery, their graves marked by simple headstones that bore their names, dates, and a single inscription chosen by their children. They saved each other. The family they had built continued to grow and thrive, generation after generation carrying forward the values Marcus and Victoria had instilled. Their story became family lore, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, that compassion can change everything, that love can bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. The small adobe house where Victoria had first taken in a dying stranger was eventually turned into a family museum of sorts, preserved as a reminder of where it all began, of the moment when two lives intersected and changed trajectory forever. And if you listened carefully on quiet desert evenings, some family members swore you could still feel the presence of Marcus and Victoria in that place, could still sense the love that had started there and spread outward to touch so many lives. It was a love story for the ages, born of desperation and sustained by devotion, proving that sometimes the greatest romances are not the easy ones but the ones forged in hardship and tempered by time, the ones built on foundations of mutual respect and genuine partnership, the ones that recognize that saving someone else can also save yourself. In the end, Marcus Rawlins had stumbled to Victoria Lane's door with nothing but pain and desperation, and she had opened that door with nothing but compassion and courage. From that single moment of kindness, an entire legacy had grown, a family tree with deep roots and spreading branches, a love story that proved the transformative power of seeing someone's humanity when they are at their lowest and choosing to help rather than turn away. They had built something remarkable together, something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes, and that, perhaps more than anything, was the true measure of their love's depth and significance. The light Marcus had lost during those terrible months of suffering had returned in Victoria's kitchen as he ate that first bowl of broth, watching her watch him with concern and care. That light had grown stronger with each passing day, fed by her love and his own growing hope, until it blazed bright enough to illuminate not just his own life, but the lives of everyone they touched. And though both were long gone, that light continued to shine through their descendants, through the values they had passed down, through the story of how a dying man and a compassionate woman had found each other in the harsh beauty of the California desert and built a love that would echo through the generations. It was a simple story, really, at its core just food and kindness, and the basic human need for connection. But from such simple beginnings, extraordinary things had grown, proving that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion can have the most profound and lasting consequences.